All right. Let's keep talking to people. Why not, right? I mean, we're all here. Let's go to where are we going here? Oh, I don't know. Why don't we go to our friend Attack from Denmark? It's been a while since we've spoken. Welcome back.
Hello, hello. Can you hear
Hello.
me?
I can hear you fine.
Awesome. Yeah, no, one of the reasons why I've actually been gone for so long is because I was actually in the military for the past couple months,
Oh,
going through
wow.
basic training. So, yeah,
That's
I've been
that's the
gone.
Danish military.
Yeah, the Danish army.
What is basic training like in Denmark?
It's 4 months total. So basically, you go through all the basic threads. Like you start out with theory and so forth. You go through things like how do you move as a unit. There's also a lot of physical training stuff like that. And then the final part of it, you basically take part in a lot of these kinds of exercise things where you have to simulate attacks and enemy positions and so forth.
Hmm.
So it's a whole thing basically. But yeah,
And this is something you chose to do?
yes, there is conscription in Denmark. I was not conscripted, however. I volunteered. I am planning on becoming an officer in the army soon enough. Especially as I, recently finished my studies in university. So this is my next thing, basically.
Interesting. And is that in Denmark, is that a good career?
As an officer in the military,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Interesting.
And one of the greatest things about becoming an officer actually is the training you get there. The leadership training is one of the most attractive ones in Denmark, and you can
Wow.
use it outside of the military as well. And so, my specific goal is to become a language officer, where I will focus on being an interpreter, basically, with a special focus on Russian and Ukrainian as the languages I'm going to be using.
Oh, wow. And what languages do you speak?
I speak Danish, German, English, and very basic Russian currently.
Okay, so your Russian would have to improve to be able to do that.
Yeah, and that's the thing that you actually do in the language officers training program is you go through a language course. That's one
Fascinating.
of the big things. It's a 2 to 3 year course that you go through, and after that, you basically are fully qualified officer, and then you get sent out on deployment for a year and a half. After which you can work on a contract, basically.
And is the this is my last question and then we can get to your question. Is the military in Denmark similar to the US in that there is lots of sort of like toxic masculine alpha type stuff that goes on, or is it different in that sense?
So this is actually super interesting. The Danish military is very much so not like that, at least not anymore.
Hmm.
One thing I can tell you is that when you see a lot of those videos of U.S. drill instructors, where yelling at the soldiers and stuff like that,
Yeah.
doesn't happen in the Danish military. At least not in my experience. If you screw up, they will come over to you and say, "Oh, well, you did that wrong. Go and do it again, please." Stuff
Right.
like that. Instead of saying, "You idiot, what are you doing?" Blah 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 blah. Like you see like what else some of those American documentaries on the U.S. military.
Yeah, that's
So
quite different. That's quite different.
you'll find toxic masculinity in there, absolutely, but there are a lot of women as well in the Danish armed forces.
Hmm.
Actually, in my course, I think about a quarter of us there were actually women, which
Okay.
was super interesting.
That is interesting. That is interesting. Well, listen, I've taken up so much of your time. I'm guessing you had a question, maybe. I don't know.
Yes, I actually did have a question, and that was actually I wanted to ask you about. I know that the Ukraine war hasn't been a very big thing recently on the show, and not been talked about a lot recently. But as of currently, the Ukrainian war, is almost in a kind of standstill and so forth.
Yes.
Front lines aren't really moving a lot. There is an offensive working towards Kherson currently from the Ukrainian side, and so my question is, do you think, as the public perception of the war winds down in the West, as we don't focus on it as much anymore over domestic issues like energy prices and so forth, do you think that Western support will continue being as strong as it has been up to, until now?
I
Or
think government support will, but I think average, Ukrainian flags in the streets is diminishing.
yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that a big problem that I see is that people think because public perception goes down, that government support will go down as well.
Mm,
But I think that we've seen during the war in Afghanistan, for instance, that we haven't constantly heard about Afghanistan 24/7 for 20 years, right?
right.
When we were still over there. Denmark was also in Afghanistan, for instance.
Yes.
But just because it's not in the news doesn't mean that support will die down, because there's obviously geopolitical interests at play here that I don't think the US or the EU want to get rid of, just because people don't really want to hear about it that much anymore.
100%, I agree with you. Yeah, I don't think that the government support will diminish.
Yeah. And so my next question is, do you think that it makes sense for the United States, for instance, to start training the Ukrainian military on more advanced weapon systems, such as Western fighter jets and so forth, which is being
Well,
discussed?
I think the answer is yes, with the asterisk of, do they have those systems, and if not, who's going to give them to them? That's obviously there would be little sense in doing the training if they're not going to have access to those systems, and or who gives them to them.
Yeah, and that was something that I saw was being discussed in Congress recently, was they wanted to start supplying F-15s to Ukraine after they started training Ukrainian pilots in them.
Mm.
So, which is interesting because, when we look at the Ukrainian military, we see a military that has been in many ways, influenced by the Soviet Union up until 2015, around when the Donbas War started.
Yes, indeed.
And in many ways, NATO, the US, and other Western countries are trying really hard currently to reintegrate the Ukrainian military from using in large part Soviet equipment to using more Western equipment.
Yes.
And seeing like the way that it's been escalating slowly but steadily from supplying anti-tank weapons in the very beginning of the war to now supplying air defense systems, missiles for Ukrainian jets, I think it's a super interesting development that, like, we don't really know where it's going to end, but I think it's really interesting to focus on that and how the Ukrainian military is going to transform as this war goes on.
It could be a dramatically different military if this does extend into the years, as many predict it will. The Ukrainian military could end up coming out of this completely differently and than it went in. And it is interesting, to say the least. Appreciate the call. Thank you.
Thank you, too.
All right. Very, very important stuff.